Deputy Vitti, madam, don't do that. Please, no, madam, don't do that. Please. Deputy Vitti, now you've indicated that you had an opportunity to talk to the nurse.
Yes. Her nurse here she stated that his meds can wait till 4 o'clock.
Okay, so we don't have to take him back over there for the medical.
Correct.
All right, very good. Okay. Please, on the witness line. Very good. Okay, very good. Mr. McCarthy, you're still under oath. You may proceed.
You just wanted me to concentrate on the witnesses? Is that
I'd like to wrap this up ultimately, but I'd like to just talk about the witnesses briefly, and then whatever else we need to go into. But this is not a full-blown hearing. I mean, trial. But go ahead, counsel.
all right?
Now, we left off talking about Kevin Hall, I believe.
Right.
Okay, then we took a little extended break. Go ahead, Counselor Long.
Okay, there were, you had discussions with Mr. Bashara about witnesses, is that correct?
Yes.
Right. Now, during the trial, were you aware of any type of live streaming of the trial?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. If it was being live streamed, would you have objected to that or not?
I had a pretty good understanding from what I observed Judge Evans do to make certain that her rulings were being observed, that that was not going on. And I know that during the jury selection time, she took a tremendous amount of effort to make certain that none of the faces of the prospective jurors were being revealed. And as I understood it, the only thing that was going to be broadcast in any way would be like the opening statements and the closing arguments. Now, because I was engaged in the trial, I was not watching television at the same time, so I have no idea what actually happened. But I don't have, and I didn't then have any knowledge that anything like that occurred.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Because there was prior to trial, there's normally a motion to sequester witnesses.
What?
Yes.
Sequester witnesses?
Okay, go ahead.
That they're not in the courtroom, that they can hear the
Sure.
testimony. Okay.
I believe such an order was issued in this case.
Fair enough. Now, did you talked about calling witnesses with Mr. Bashara, correct?
Yes.
Okay. One of the witnesses I want to talk about to begin with is Chief Hiller from the Grosse Pointe Park Police Department. Did you discuss anything with regard to Chief Hiller?
No, Mr. Bashara was of the impression that Chief Hiller had some sort of a grudge against him.
Okay.
And so he thought that that would be relevant. However, I thought that that would be very dangerous. And Mrs. Diallo was in agreement with me that Chief Hiller was not a person that we wanted to have on the witness stand to assault or to impeach, rather, with a grudge, because then that would have opened up a can of worms that had to do with an allegation brought against Mr. Bashara a number of years before that had to do with him molesting a child of one of his sisters-in-law.
And that was unfounded, correct?
Well, I just know that he wasn't that he was not prosecuted, but I also believed that it would not help the defense in the least bit to have that instance that allegation or accusation brought up again in open court in front of the jurors that had to decide whether he was involved in this murder. So absolutely not. I didn't want Chief Hiller there.
But
Wait a
this-
minute, hold on for a minute. And you're saying that Mr. Bashara wanted to call Chief Hiller as a witness?
I think Mr. Bashara suggested his name. I don't ever recall him making a demand that he be called, especially after I explained to him all those things that were negatives about Chief Hiller,
But this,
Including this allegation?
including this allegation that was referred to rather cryptically by the mother of that child in the pre-sentence victim impact report
Okay.
statement.
Now, that allegation happened in the 90s.
So I understand.
Okay.
And you were able to retrieve the pre-sentence report?
Well, the pre-sentence report in this case
Oh, in this case, okay.
included a statement from that sister, who was the mother of the child, in which she made a cryptic reference to what had occurred. She stated that she wished that she had followed through with the prosecution of Mr. Bashara at that time, and it would saved her sister's life, but that she was forced.
Well, we don't need to get all in there.
Right, but I
Go
mean,
ahead.
fact is, those are the reasons why I didn't want to have Chief Hiller on the stand opening all that up.
And you
front of the
believe that
jury.
Chief Hiller would have done that?
Well, sure he would, because
Okay.
the whole thing about the grudge was based on that investigation by the Grosse Pointe Park Police Department that did not end up being a prosecution.
I get it. So that was the crux of the grudge that was between, allegedly, Mr. Bashir and Chief Hiller, was the lack of prosecution of this case.
That is correct.
Okay, go ahead.
But in this case, Chief Hiller, without any evidence whatsoever of Bob Bashara's involvement in this murder, had named him as a suspect, right?
Yeah, that happened on the
Okay. And so there
27th of January.
So there was some sort of underlying reason, without any evidence, to charge Bob Bashara, or not charge him, but name him as a suspect.
Pardon?
There had to be some sort of underlying reason, without any evidence of Bob Bashara's involvement, to name him as a suspect.
What do you want to... He did that, I mean, I'm not going to speak for him, but he made that announcement after Mr. Bashara submitted to 2 interrogations with the police department.
Okay.
That's when that announcement was made.
All right, and there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime.
I don't know what they had at that point. They were conducting a search during the time of the second interrogation on the 27th of January, and I'm not certain exactly how much of that they had been able to review and come to any conclusion about. But I do know that they did make that statement. And also, it should be noted that in the pretrial litigation, one of the motions I brought was to keep Chief Hiller from bringing up anything having to do with this allegation of child molestation. And that motion was granted.
Dean Valente, you're aware, do you know who that is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and who is that?
Well, he was a lawyer who did some work for Mr. Bashara, who was subjected to a search warrant, had his at least one, if not more, computers and other documents seized.
Wasn't it more than this?
Well, let him finish.
I'm sorry.
And then
Go
that's
ahead.
what I understand. And then the police had his materials for a long period of time, and he hired a lawyer, as I understand it, to get his things back. That's what I know about Dean Valente.
Okay, and did Mr. Bashara and yourself discuss him as a witness?
I don't recall discussing Dean Valente as a witness. I didn't see where he would have anything valuable to provide in this case, but I certainly was interested in Lois Valente, his former wife.
And what would Lois Valente, well, Lois,
We already covered that.
Wouldn't Dean Valente have been a good character witness?
You know, getting into character with Mr. Bashara was a very dangerous proposition. And one of the reasons that would be dangerous is I didn't want to open up the door and have some of this business about these unsavory things like this child molestation coming out. I didn't think character would be all that good. And so I didn't want to bring in character witnesses. But in the end, I was able to get reasonably decent information out of Michael Carmody, and also I think his name is Andrew McSwinning, something like that. who testified that Mr. Bashara was both of them testified that he was very involved in fundraising, charitable things. So I was able to show many positive attributes of Mr. Bashara through those two witnesses. And when I say I mean myself and Mrs. Diallo.
Michael Carmody, though, wasn't necessarily a character witness, was he?
Oh, no, he wasn't a character witness, but one of Mr. Bashara's repeated statements to myself and Mrs. Diallo was that, you know, these people are saying I'm a bad guy, and here I am doing all this good charitable work, and so we brought that out through Mr. Carmody, I thought very effectively on cross-examination, to show that Mr. Bashara had helped to raise $3 million or 3 million pounds of food and clothing for charitable works. Mr. McSwimming testified to those same things. I argued in the end that when the Secret Service agent said that it was odd that Mr. Bashara pointed out that he was the president of the Rotary, that that wasn't because he was incredulous that a president of the Rotary could ever be charged with a crime, but because what he did in his life was to try and do good for other people, and that he had done so, and he had a long history of doing so. So I believe that we got plenty of good character into the record in spite of the fact that we had all this very unsavory BDSM information presented to the jury.
Now, you mentioned about, and I just want to talk briefly about that. Had you done any type of investigation or consulting with anybody about that lifestyle?
Mr. Bashara told me a lot about it, but no, I didn't see that there would be a useful
because it's a dark subject, right? Normally, people, general public, thinks it's a dark subject, right? It's unsavory. People generally think it's unsavory.
That's true.
But would it surprise you that many people of all walks of life are maybe engaged in it?
I have no idea that that's true.
Okay. Because you didn't seek that out.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
That was, as far as I was concerned, we keep as much of a lid on that as we could. We weren't able to keep it completely out. I thought most of the people that testified regarding the lifestyle, the guys that claimed that they were experts, really looked like buffoons. I didn't think that any of that had a thing to do with Mr. Bashara being dead, or Mrs. Bashara being dead, but certainly because he secreted it and he had that dungeon and he didn't tell the truth about having an affair, those things came out as legitimate, relevant evidence.
And I want to pinpoint that. Kind of goes to the issue of the reason why he was into it and his relationship with Jane Bashara that was never brought out to the jury.
Mr. Bashara didn't testify.
Right.
He could have got up and told all those things, but I don't know who else was going to be telling us about the vaginal thing, if that's what you're...
Okay, and you strongly suggested to him not to testify.
Yeah, that'd still be my advice today. If I had to do this all over again, I wouldn't change that one bit.
Even though his version never got out.
His version of what? That he didn't commit the crime? It
Yeah.
was out as big as life throughout this whole trial. All those jurors were fully aware of the fact that he pled not guilty to each one of those counts. So his version was out there. He was not guilty. That was never a question, a reasonable question in anyone's mind what his position was.
But as to, I mean, the trial got sidetracked with this, and you said it yourself, this sadomasochist bondage issue was a good portion of the trial, right?
I didn't say that it ever got sidetracked. I think that the focus of the prosecution was always on getting a conviction in this case.
All right, and it was, let's
and there
face
was
it.
a lot of evidence presented that had nothing to do with
Right.
BDSM. Instead, it had a lot to do with the horrible, excruciating death that Mrs. Bashara died, and all of the physical evidence that the police were able to get together, and all the telephone records that the police were able to get together that connected Mr. Bashara to Mr. Getz and to Miss, what's her name, girlfriend Gillette.
Okay, and don't you think it was, since they had no physical evidence of Mr. Bashara's involvement, don't you think it was from pretty much the beginning of the case a character assassination?
Well, I argued that it was a rush to judgment. That was exactly what we said at the conclusion of the trial, and that was what was presented to the jury in summation.
Elizabeth Stone, do you know who that would be? Does that ring a bell?
Refresh my record.
Okay, she was at the Hard Luck Lounge at 6:30 on the night of the murder.
Okay.
Did you ever discuss that with Mr. her with Mr. Bashara?
I don't have a specific recollection of discussing her name. However, I believe that there was something about her that was investigated that she really wouldn't corroborate his testimony, or his theory rather. But we did have the other witnesses who put him there.
Okay.
In that spot. So I can't give you real good specifics regarding Elizabeth Stone right now.
Greg Barack.
Spell these names, please.
B-A-R-R-A-C-O.
Well, he was somebody I was aware of.
Okay.
He was a friend of Joe Getz.
Yes. Now, did you want him as
Now
a
spell his name again.
B-A-R-R-A-C-O?
B-A-R-R-A-C-O.
Yes.
And first name Stephen?
Greg.
Greg, okay.
I didn't want him as a witness. I didn't want any of these people as witnesses. I'm defending Mr. Bashara. The less witnesses we had, the better I liked it.
Why was that?
Well, Mr. Baracco was, he was friendly with this woman named Frances Natali. And not the night of the murder, I'm trying to remember the exact night. I'm thinking it's around the 30th of January. Mr. Baracco and she had some sort of interaction with Mr. Bashara. In addition to that, back in
With Mr. Bashara.
I mean,
Mr. Getz.
Mr. Getz, I'm sorry. In addition to that, back in December, I think it was, Mr. Baracco had a conversation with Joe Getz in which Joe Getz was seeking assistance with a hit, and I believe that he mentioned the name Bob, I think. That's what I recall about Mr. Baracco, but it's been a little time since I read up on him.
Okay. And to your knowledge, Mr. Baracco never went to the police with the information that he initially got from Joseph Getz.
Well, he certainly was talked to by the police.
But that was, I'm talking about prior to the...
Prior to the killing?
Right.
No, I don't believe that he did.
Any of the inmates, did you discuss with Mr. Bashara any of the inmates that had contact with Joseph Getz?
Who are you talking about?
There's Kevin Hall.
Well, we just addressed that in the morning. I don't know anything about him.
How about Wesley Johnson?
I know about Wesley Johnson. What do you know about him?
Tell us about Wesley Johnson.
Wesley Johnson, I heard about him to begin with I think it's on July the 19th, Sunday morning. I received an email from David Grimm, myself and Mrs.
This is
Gallo.
2014, we just need a year or
Right,
two, sir.
2014, last summer, well, we're 2.5 months or thereabouts before the trial began. He had received some communications from Mr., what's his last name?
Johns.
Wesley?
Johnson?
Johnson,
So
okay.
he got some communications from him. And basically, there were solicitations to Mr. Grimm that if, he thought he could be helpful. And then, but I looked through
Helpful
them.
in what way?
oh, he could be helpful to Mr. Bashara's case because he had information regarding Mr. Gens, who was, housed in the same prison facility as him. But the more I read it, as I went through the progression of the 3 letters that Mr. Grimm had received, it was obvious that this man was looking to do something for his own benefit. And he wanted some information. And then if some information was provided to him, he would be able to be very helpful to the defense. So then I got a letter from Mr. Jensen that he sent all on his own, directly to me rather, without Mr. Grimm. And that came sometime later in the summer. And in that letter, he reminded me that a few years earlier, I had represented him on a case up in Oakland County where he stole something and was successful in having that case dismissed. And then he suggested to me in his letter that he could be very helpful to Mr. Bashara, and that if I would provide information to him, then he could be helpful to the defense by him having the benefit of that knowledge. Now, this was nothing more than a solicitation for a person willing to serve as a perjurer. Well, I wasn't about to have anything to do with that, so I never responded to Mr. Johnson. It was the same attitude I had toward what he had written to David Grimm when I read those letters in July of last year, and then when I got my own letter sent to me, I never paid any attention to it.
Where
That's
was
just nonsense.
Where was Johnson located?
I forget. It was in the same place. He might have been up in the Macomb Correctional Facility, but he was in the same place at some point where Joe Gens was.
Okay, at some point. But your previous testimony was that the case was saturated in the media, correct?
That was, I think, your discussion.
Well, I thought you said
I
it was
used the word
like
saturated in the media.
nationwide, that there is no place in the United States that Mr. Bashara could get a fair trial.
Well, I didn't say there was no place in the United States he couldn't get a fair trial. What I said was he got a fair trial here. I didn't see any reason why it was that he needed to have a change of venue.
Okay.
That's what I said.
So, but your theory was that it reached all over the United States.
That's not my theory. Those are facts.
Okay, but if that's the fact, then why didn't Wesley Johnson just look in the paper or the media while he was in prison?
Well, he can't know why Wesley Johnson did anything.
But I mean, you're saying that he was looking for information from you, but it was already out there, wasn't it?
I can't help what he wrote in the letter.
But that's, I mean, certainly Larry Ellington had enough information about the case, right?
I thought he did. He even testified that he had some knowledge of it.
Right.
So why am I going to put on a person who's a perjurer, as I argued to the jury that Larry Ellington was? That doesn't advance the case for the defense in the least bit.
No, I understand that, but I'm just saying that if Larry Ellington had information about the case from reading the media reports, then so did Wesley Johnson. Could have easily done the same.
Well, that
correct?
causes speculation. He doesn't know. Move on, move on.
Okay, but the point I'm trying to make is that maybe the case wasn't as saturated within the whole state of Michigan as maybe you had thought.
Well, maybe it calls for speculation.
Let's just move on, okay?
Patty Matthews, are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Okay, who is Patty Matthews?
she was a friend of Jane's.
Right.
She, as I understood it, they were high school friends, I think, and went back a long time. They shared some intimate details with one another, but she didn't share with Patty Matthews, Mrs. Bashara.
Matthews?
Matthews.
Okay.
Patty Matthews. She didn't share with her the sexual issues between herself and Mr. Bashara. That was left only to Mrs. Valente.
She was a high school friend with Jane Bashara.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And she would have testified that she didn't see any marital discourse.
I don't know, her testimony was read into the record because she was unavailable at the time that she was to be called. And so she testified at the preliminary examination, and that is the testimony that's part of the trial record.
Now, I put into my motion Nicholas and Scott Puglia.
Spell the first name.
Nicholas, Nicholas,
And last name?
Pugia.
Very good.
Now, are you familiar with those? That name?
Yes.
And who is that?
Those are some folks that had a violent or exchange or experience with Mr. Gens that goes back sometime into the 1990s.
Okay. And do you recall the nature of that violence?
I think one's the father, the other's the son. I think Joe Gens did something to the son, threatened the father. There was a BB gun involved. I don't remember all the details.
And a crowbar involved?
Could have been.
Did you talk with Mr. Bashara about that witness?
I don't remember if we discussed that person or not.
How about Daryl Bradford?
I remember the name.
Okay. What do you remember about him?
There's 70 witnesses plus in this case. Give me a little bit of
Okay,
information regarding him. I didn't see his name in your motion.
Okay, he was, he made an allegation about Mr. Bashara that Mr. Bashara bought drugs from him.
Okay?
Okay. But you don't recall specifically who that would
I know the name.
Okay.
There's some other connection besides him being Mr. Bashara's drug connection.
be. Okay, the thing that I was trying to get out is, in his statement to the police, he says that there's a Cadillac that Mr. Bashara used to purchase the drugs, that he would drive in his Cadillac to purchase the drugs, and that the facts of the matter is that Cadillac had been inoperable since 2009.
Okay?
So, did you ever discuss that with Mr. Bashara?
I think Mr. Bashara told me that the Cadillac wasn't running.
Okay.
Well, how long it hadn't been running, I'm not sure.
Okay. Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
All right. You need, let's take a break. You want to get some water or something? Okay.
If you had a name like the #1 witness in the case, would you say that would be Joseph Gens for the defense?
No. For all the reasons I told you before. He would have been a decent witness to cross-examine had he testified for the people, but when you put a witness up yourself and he is subject to cross-examination, he can put out a lot of information that could be damaging. I wouldn't agree that he was the #1 witness in the case, or would have been. However, he clearly was a very important personage in the entire case.
But you named him as a witness, right?
Yes, and I explained that this morning, why I did so.
And there was a plea agreement between him, Joseph Gens, and the prosecution.
Yes.
And he reneged on that plea agreement.
I saw him do it.
Okay. And prosecution did nothing about it.
That's got nothing to do with me.
And to your understanding, was there ever any type of immunity given to Joseph Gens for his further testimony?
Further testimony, he didn't testify at all.
Well, for his testimony.
What immunity would he need? He had double jeopardy attached. He wouldn't have needed immunity.
Okay, so at that point, well,
He would have been testifying as a witness for the prosecution. How would they possibly have been having him charged when he'd already pled guilty to committing this murder?
and he failed to testify. He did not testify. He refused to
True.
testify. And the prosecution did nothing about
Okay, fine. What was he gonna do if the prosecutor didn't want to do anything about it?
it. Your Honor, I'm just making a point about...
Okay, you made that point. Now let's move on.
Okay.
Anything further? Now,
Yeah. Just one last question about Joseph Gens. He made in his statement to the police, he testifies that there was an automatic involved in this case, correct? That Bob Bashara...
He didn't testify when he talked to the police. He made a statement
He
to the
made a
police.
statement to the police that an automatic was involved in this.
That's right.
All right, and the facts of the case is there is no automatic in this case.
There's no automatic in the bank deposit box that Bob Bashara's mother found. She found some sort of an old revolver.
Okay.
So I was fully aware of that contradiction, and had he testified, that would have been helpful. But he took the Fifth Amendment, so that kind of put that out of reach for me.
Very good. I have no further questions.
you sure? You sure?
Yes.
All right. Your turn.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think as you indicated, you have a bit of experience as a defense attorney, correct?
That's true.
Okay, and I would imagine that in that experience you've done murder, first-degree murder cases, correct?
Yes, I have.
And I think you also testified specifically the Cipriano. You didn't represent Cipriano itself, but it was a fairly high publicity case in Oakland County, correct?
There was.
So you're familiar with the issue of pretrial media publicity on a case, correct?
That's true, because that's not the only one of those high publicity cases that I've tried.
Okay. You've done others.
I've done others, going back to the 1990s.
And from your experience in these type of cases, whether it was a Cipriano case or any other case that you're referring to, you knew that there were certain measures that could be taken to sort of ensure that there is an unbiased and a fair jury, correct?
That's right.
And some of those measures were done in this particular case,
Yes,
including the question.
including the question.
Now, prior to trial, actually prior to voir dire in this particular case, jury selection in this case, you were familiar with that there was going to be a questionnaire used.
Yes, that was all part of our pretrial work.
And certainly that, I think you also testified that the final version of the questionnaire wasn't available until the day of the Lot A was being questioned. Is that what your testimony was?
Well, no, the final version of the questionnaire was done on the first day that the entire jury pool came. It was divided up into 3 groups, and everyone received the questionnaire that day. But they had the questionnaire, they completed the questionnaire because the judge gave them, the way I remember it, a couple of hours to take those and to complete them and then bring them back. We had the people divided up into the 3 groups. We had all those answers. We didn't start actually the voir dire until the following morning, with the benefit of those answers.
Okay, so the final version was the day before you started voir dire on Lot A,
Yes.
correct? Okay, and even before you had the final version, you were familiar with sort of what the questions were going to be presented in that questionnaire.
Yeah, because we submitted questions ourselves, Mrs. Diallo and I. The prosecution team submitted questions. I know that they gave their questions to us, and we gave ours to them. And what I don't remember, I know Judge Evans had questions of her own. I saw those at least on that Monday, I'm not certain, or Tuesday, the day we began it, but I'm not certain if I'd seen those before.
Was there anything about the questionnaire that you felt was unfair or inappropriate to have?
No,
And you were certainly comfortable with that questionnaire going to the jury.
it was perfectly fine as far as I was concerned.
And at the completion of the jury selection, you certainly indicated to the court that you were satisfied with that jury.
That's right.
It was, even in hindsight, do you have any second thought as to the fairness of the jury that was selected?
No, none whatsoever.
Now, during trial, or even prior to trial, I'm sure that much as Mr. Bashara is doing today, he was giving you ideas for witnesses to call, correct?
Well, he was giving us ideas, yes,
Okay.
and among them would be witnesses.
And you had an opportunity to discuss this with Mr. Bashara
I did?
and with Ms. Diallo,
Yes.
and you were able to reach an agreement between the three of you, correct?
Yes.
On most of these items.
I thought so, yes.
Okay. Now, going to the question as to the use of an investigator. Was there anything that you asked the investigator to do that he did not do?
Well, if he failed to do something that I asked him to do, it is news to me that that occurred.
Okay. And did he ever indicate to you, I'm not getting paid for this, I'm not going to do it?
No, in fact, you know, the first I had any inkling of that was when I read Mr. Bruce's affidavit. And then I attached to the motion that the defendant filed, there's this Exhibit A that has a number of things added to it, communications with Judge Kenny, communication with Judge Colombo, and his own affidavit. In the letter to Judge Colombo, he said that he did everything that he was asked to do, and he didn't not do, or he didn't fail to do anything, because that would have denied the defendant a fair trial. But then I read in his affidavit that he cut back on doing things. That is news to me. I never heard him say, well, I can't do that because I'm not getting paid. And furthermore, Mr. Bruce wasn't our only investigator. We had Mr. Glaspie. Mr. Glaspie never brought any problems to my attention that he wasn't getting paid. And Mr. Bruce did everything I asked him to do. And I believe that Mrs. Diallo asked him to do.
Okay. And the same's true for Mr. Glaspie, correct?
Oh, absolutely, without question.
Okay. So you're unaware of any witness, any evidence that just was not, something that you wanted, some witness or some evidence that you wanted, that the investigator just chose not to do because he wasn't getting paid?
He didn't tell me that. I mean, there was obviously some attempts made to find.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute recess. Are you able to finish?
I can finish.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna take a 10-minute recess.
Very good.
Okay. Are you okay?